As they're coming up, I spoke to a national guy from the SCORE organization yesterday on the phone. Anybody know what SCORE stands for? Anybody familiar with the SCORE organization? Retired executives, they try to help business people. I talked to a national guy yesterday, and he was talking about how they could grow their organization. He's out in DC, where they're located. And I go, most people call me over the years looking to raise money. Sometimes a bank works for them, like Highland Bank and Angie. Most of the time it needs to be equity because I'm working with growing companies. But I said, that's the number one. But number two is selling stuff. Everybody wants to sell more, whether you got a widget or a service or software, it doesn't matter. Everybody wants to sell more. I heard that from you today with people who came that I haven't seen before or I don't see very often. So that's what we're going to get to today. All right, with that said, my panelist to my left, Tom Holderly is the sales fixer at Raven Business Advisor and Sales Acceleration. Welcome.
Thank you.
Rebecca Gebhart is at Rise Up Consulting. Welcome, Rebecca. And Scott Plum is Minnesota Sales Institute. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
My pleasure. Thank you.
And to save my voice, I'm going to not do much of an introduction of them, but why don't we start with you, Tom, and then we'll just let everybody tell a little bit about themselves. I would say they're here because I've interacted with them. They've interacted with themselves. We've spent a fair amount of time putting our questions and our script together today, and probably going to fill up most of the time ourselves, but maybe there might be a chance for questions at the end. If there's not, they'll hang around, come up, introduce yourself, get their cards, stuff like that. All right, Tom.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I spent 30 years in sales, a variety of sales leadership positions with large manufacturing companies, primarily in the printing, paper, and packaging space up until a few years ago. Then I went independent, started Raven Business Advisors, and now I help small to medium-sized companies build out their sales strategy. I help them with strategy, process, execution, leadership, and I do that by working as an outsourced VP of sales. I'm from the Twin Cities. I live in Prior Lake. Was not born and raised here, but I've lived here twice, and I consider this home. And I get called grandpa a lot because I've got two little kids, and for somebody my age to have a 4 and a 7-year-old, I get confused as being their grandpa quite a bit.
So how many years have you lived here?
I came here to go to college and then started my career, got moved around. And when I moved back, I've been here a little over 20 years since I moved back.
Okay, well, being from Minnesota, that's not long enough to qualify. 20 years is not enough. So he's still an outsider at 20 years, right? Rebecca, thanks for coming, Tom.
My pleasure.
Well, like Gramps here, I am also not from Minnesota, but have lived here for about 11 years. I got my start in sales when I was in college. So I started door-to-door sales. I sold educational books and software, door-to-door, 80 hours a week. And through that, I learned the principles of sales, what not to do, what to do, and then that's elevated to a 20-year career in sales leadership. My focus isn't necessarily sales training, but training the sales leaders who have the biggest impact over salespeople's success. You can train someone how to do something, but if they're not being supported and coached by those who have the most influence over them, the ones who release the resources, and there's not going to survive. My specialty is the niche of emerging sales leaders. So when someone goes from the leaderboard to leadership, and what I focus on with organizational leaders are the skills that they need to have a big impact on recruiting top caliber salespeople, the retention of those people, and then to increase revenue.
And you've also written a book.
I have also written a book on goal setting, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And your background has covered a lot of different things that have allowed you to come at this from many different angles. And curious, you did the door-to-door sales. I've done that. Who all out here has sold something door-to-door?
Wow.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's like you know how to sell when you sell something door to door, I'm telling you. All right, Scott.
Yeah. Scott Plum, my company is the Minnesota Sales Institute. I have a podcast called Winning at Selling. You can go to winningatselling.com. I wrote a book called Taking Off into the Wind, Creating Lift Out of Life. It's an inspirational book. I also did not grow up from around here. I grew up in St. Paul.
Oh, boy. Well, as a West Sider, I won't hold that against you.
So sometimes I don't fit in. Nobody from St. Paul moves to Minneapolis, and nobody from Minneapolis moves to St. Paul. But I really believe that sales is the engine that pulls the train. And you can tell a good sales leader, a good sales department by the amount of revenue that they bring in for the company. And a good marketing team, good marketing folks, you can tell they're good because of the awards that they receive. And it's a little bit more passive than active, and it's always an interesting combination between the two. And within the sales channel, I work on creating collaborative and committed sales teams that work on their sales techniques, their behaviors, their strategies, etc. But none of that is really effective or works unless you connect with salespeople, you really uncover some of their beliefs, you really want to work with them to be able to give them the safety and security to be able to get better results. And that's generally what holds salespeople back, is they love to get to a level of complacency. They love to gravitate towards their comfort zone. And what really holds them back is the beliefs. So today I want to really share with you the importance of beliefs and how effective that is when you're working in the behavior modification area. You can spend a lot of time on techniques and strategy and tactics, but if you don't really uncover the beliefs that salespeople have, you're not going to be effective in manipulating, and manipulating can be good for some salespeople because they need it, and modifying their behavior and really finding out, what's really in it for them when it comes to change and growth.
Great, thank you. And the way we're going to organize today, I'm going to give the three of them each an opportunity to answer a couple questions kind of about their vertical niche that they're in. But before we get to that, let's just talk just briefly, and Tom, let's come down here to you to start. Sure. Kind of what's different today in the post-COVID era from pre-COVID? What observations have you seen, and how's the world a little different?
Sure. Well, I think that the consumer behavior has changed. It's been changing for a while, but I think COVID really kind of accelerated it. And some of the changes that I've seen is that buyers now are very well informed, much more so than they have been previously. There's so many tools out there for them to do research, and many times their decision has been made long before there's any sales contact. Sales contact might just be kind of reaffirming what they were already thinking of by doing their own research. The other thing that has changed is that, once again, I've been doing this for 30 years, so I say the younger buyers, and I don't mean that, against anybody, but younger buyers don't want the relationship. They don't necessarily want the face-to-face sales contact. So that makes it more difficult. The other thing is that with COVID and with more people working from home, finding the key decision maker, the key buyer, those people are harder to reach, harder to find. And so that's made it more challenging in the sales environment. The old adage, people want to buy, but people don't want to be sold. I'm seeing that more now than ever. People want to be educated. People want that value-added relationship. They don't want features and benefits.
Great. Rebecca.
I'll take the angle of how salespeople have changed, and there has been because this is what it affects with sales leaders and how to help them. But salespeople, when COVID happened and everything stopped, we got a chance to look up and say, oh, I don't have to be miserable, right? The old way of sales was put your head down, go to work, grind it out. And then there was this, do I have to do it like this? I want some more autonomy. And I always say, blame Simon Sinek, the why. But sales leaders have to do a much better job uncovering the why of their salespeople, discovering their motivations, like Scott was talking about, and understanding that there has always been turnover in sales. There has always been disengagement in general with companies, but what good people want, and last month, Angela had made a comment where it was about recruiting and onboarding, that talent always has options, and I loved that, and I kept writing that down. You want to keep your really great salespeople, and how you do that is making sure that you're training them, you're giving them opportunities for development, and you really are coaching them to bring out the best in them, because they will leave.
Great. Scott?
I think when COVID hit, it was like the tide went out and all the sharp rocks were exposed. And they were always there, they just weren't present. And there were a lot of benefits and a lot of activities and results that were really covering that up. And then all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, we got to work differently with our salespeople. We need to work differently with our customers, clients, prospects. And we need to be able to really focus on what's most important to them. And I've noticed that the relationship between a sales manager or a sales leader and the sales team has become, it needs to be more personal, and it needs to have more of a connection, and there needs to be more coaching when working with the sales team that is in some cases remote, and a lot of them want to stay remote, and it's going to make it very challenging for them to come back to the office to work. So the sales leadership has to really concentrate on coaching and not concentrate so much on critiquing and criticizing salespeople, because it's very easy for them to become disengaged because you cannot witness their behavior during the day. You can monitor them. I mean, you can micromanage them, as they say. And I don't say that sales leaders micromanage salespeople. They proactively manage and lead salespeople. But it all starts with, what does sales leadership want in the sales team? What is the goal? What is the strategy? How is the performance being measured? What are we working on, goal activities, or are we working on to-do activities? And when you're trading your time within the day, every activity has got to have a return on investment, a return on time, and it boils down to priorities and good decisions.
Great. Let's stay down with you and
Yep.
work through the questions that we have on your front. When should somebody start talking about training?
Probably day one, during the onboarding process. I think that's really the time where you need to really set clear written expectations first. You need to be able to create accountability. And salespeople always want to be recognized, but they never want to be accountable. And good sales managers say, I'm going to recognize you, and I'm going to make you accountable. And then the third step is that there needs to be consequences if they do not perform certain activities, reach certain benchmarks. And sales leadership needs to really work on managing the activities and the front end of the sales process, which are the leading activities versus the lagging activities. Too often we look at sales reports and we're not getting the results, but what's happening is we're not getting the activities in the beginning. So when should we start sales training? Unfortunately, companies look at the monthly results or the weekly results and say, our sales are down. We should think about getting sales training. But they don't do that until there's 3 consecutive months. Well, unfortunately, the problem is just going to get worse before it gets better, because there's so many leading edge activities that were not started. And when your sales process is 6 months and you're reacting 3 months late, it's already too late. So you really need to look at, what am I measuring? I have to be measuring activities. I need to be measuring qualified leads in the sales funnel. And I need to be able to confirm that in the results, not look at the results and determine what I'm going to do or not do at that time.
So other than looking in the rear view mirror, what are some other common training mistakes that you see happening?
Well, there are some companies that have bought a system in 1993 and they're still using it because they haven't paid it off yet. And the market has changed. And content in today's marketplace post-COVID has got to be relevant to the marketplace, relevant to how prospects buy, relevant to the value proposition, and relevant to the salesperson as to what they can control to start more conversations. Every salesperson trades their time every single day. Am I getting a return on investment in my time, or am I spending my time? No investment, I'm spending my time, which means I'm not going to ever get it back either. So sometimes it's outdated sales systems.
So what are some other things that are missing besides the outdated sales systems?
I think scorecards and what you're measuring is not really relevant and accurate to the sales process. Every sales company or every company sells something differently depending on what industry that you're in. And there can be multiple transactions within a relationship, or sometimes it can be a long sales cycle when you're building a relationship and selling a service. So you need to really concentrate on the solution. Is it multiple transactions within a relationship or one relationship? And when you're selling multiple transactions within a relationship, the question that I always work with my clients on is, when did you lose the business? And sometimes if they don't know when they lost the client switched vendors, they started buying it from somebody else, you don't know, and it's already too late. So when did you lose the business? You really have to live that. And as the market is contracting right now, that is going to become more of a highlight. Are companies making the right purchasing decisions, or are they going to look for options? So we need to first retain all of our existing clients, and then look at opportunities of taking clients from other people, other companies.
How about training failures? Where do you see companies fall down when they're trying to do training? So their intent is good, and they just drop the ball or don't do it right or whatever.
The most common problem that I've seen is leadership is not in the room for training. I get sendees. I get brought in, and I get sendees, so companies are sending their salespeople to me to fix them. And leadership is not willing to change. And a culture is defined by what leadership is willing to tolerate. And if leadership's not in the room, they're not going to be able to have an impact on the culture, so the salespeople are going to do whatever they can, which in some cases is the least amount of resistance because it's the safest for them, and management doesn't know how to lead people, they just know how to micromanage them. That doesn't do any good for anybody.
What about what training formats have you found to be maybe the most effective or the easiest to use, or what? Because the world's changing, so training formats today obviously different than training formats 5-10 years ago.
I think you have to work on whatever is easiest to start, and you have to continue it. I mean, there are remote workers, so you have to do virtual, and there's also people in person, so you have to be able to do that. But the most important part is the reinforcement. Over time, the adult learning model is incremental growth reinforced over time. And every time you have a sales meeting or have a class, the format that I follow is there's 5 things at the end of every class. Number 1 is, what is the goal that you are going to accomplish within the next 7 to 14 days? What did you like most during our session? What did you like least during our session? What are you going to start doing, and what are you going to stop doing? And when you get salespeople to commit to that after a training session, and you hold them accountable over the course of a week or 2 weeks, and then you pull out that sheet again and say, here's what you gave us last time. How are you doing on that? You got to hold them accountable. And if you don't hold them accountable, they're going to feel like they're going to get away with it, and you're setting a culture of not holding your salespeople accountable, and it's going to continue to grow into a big problem where now you've got to act. And now it's a big challenge in order to do that because you've overlooked it and tolerated it for so long, it kind of manifests itself. And within a sales culture with multiple salespeople, that's like a cancer. And all the standards just drop down a notch every time you do not address a problem. And salespeople keep getting away with it, and nothing ever changes.
How about barriers to successful training? What's getting in the way other than attitudes and lack of engagement from senior management?
Yeah, this is something I put into Chat GPT this morning. I said, top sales training barriers. I got 10 things. And I thought, wow, 5 of them are really good. I would have thought of that. 5 of them are like, I never thought of that. I never thought of language, or I never thought of culture. But the barriers to sales training is making it relevant and having that personal connection with that salesperson and really concentrating on what is in it for me. Our primary motivation is selfish. It is self-interest. And we need to always have something that's in it for us in order for us to change. So barriers are a lack of connection with the reps, the lack of reinforcement over time, the measurement is soft or inconsistent, and it doesn't work on leading edge activities, it just works on lagging activities and results, and in that case, it's too late. But it really needs to be focused on what do you know and what do you do? And if you don't do what you know, and you don't know what you know, you need to work on that. So do I need to teach them how to do it and then hold them accountable to execute on it? And that's where the management and leadership of sales really breaks down, is they can't do what they don't know, and they don't know what they don't know. So we need to work on that.
All right.
Who's on first? What's on second?
All right, thank you. Hey, Tom, let's jump down here. We talked a little bit about how sales and the role of sales have changed since COVID. Maybe add a little bit more to that if you feel like you should, and or let's go back even further, 5 or 10 years. How has sales changed?
Sure. Before I get into that, just to add on to what Scott said, I think the number one training mistake that I've seen is companies just don't do it. You'd be surprised how many very large organizations just don't do sales training. And then I agree with Scott as far as there has to be accountability. Once you've trained somebody, there has to be accountability to the new standard, and I see that as a major failure. As far as how how sales has transformed, as I mentioned before, a lot of the trends that we saw get accelerated during COVID had been in the works previously, and COVID was just kind of that catalyst that really brought it to the front. And we're seeing technology change, we're seeing demographics change, and that's making the sales more complicated, more difficult. I think probably the biggest change that I have seen in the past, let's say 20 years, is the shift from selling features and benefits to adding value. And a lot of people talk about adding value, but it's more than just selling a product or service. It's being a resource to your client. Maybe it's bringing them opportunities and resources that don't really have anything to do with what you're selling in particular. And I see that continuing. And I think that's probably the number one thing, is that we've moved from more transactional to definitely more value-based. Rebecca mentioned earlier about your why. Knowing your why, knowing your value prop has become so much more critical now than it has been in the past 20 years.
How about the key attributes of a successful salesperson? Is that different today than it was in the past? Or how, if you were helping a company build out their sales force, what would you be looking for right now in a successful salesperson?
I don't know that it's really changed. I just think that we've gotten better at identifying what truly makes a successful salesperson. And I know when I first started in sales, I was, I'm more of an introvert. And I was very concerned that, hey, I'm not the life of the party. I don't come and work the room. Am I going to be successful in sales? And that used to be kind of the model. It was the very outgoing, gregarious people that were just assumed to be better salespeople. But the attributes that I look for is, number one, people have to be a good listener. And that gets forgotten. Everybody's worried about presentation style and speaking ability. No, listening is number one. Curiosity is number two. Well, these aren't necessarily in any particular order, but curiosity is definitely key. And then finally, being a servant, being that whole model of being a servant leader for your client. I think those are the three key things that I would look for in an aspiring sales rep.
I mentioned earlier on the intro about the kind of friction between sales and marketing, and it's a natural thing, right? But how has that changed over the years, and kind of where do you see that relationship these days?
In some organizations, there still is that friction, but in organizations that are moving forward, that are more successful, the collaboration between sales and marketing is definitely critical. The way I look at it is sales and marketing are two sides of the same coin. So, the marketing has to be on that front end, help develop that value prop, help develop, some of that lead gen and things like that for the sales team. Sales team has to execute on it, but the sales team also then has to provide adequate data back to marketing. So the two are really a team. And organizations that are still have sales and marketing and adversarial roles are not successful. In fact, as a consultant, when I come into an organization to look at their sales issues, many times I'm like, you need to bring me in with my friend here who's a chief marketing officer, because you can't fix one without the other.
What about, we touched on some of the training failures earlier with Scott. What about failures kind of within the sales organization itself?
I think, once again, not doing it. And the biggest, many companies fall into this trap, especially larger organizations, that when times are good and they're selling everything that they can make, oh, we don't need sales training. And then the market changes and things get very competitive. Well, now we don't have the budget for sales training. So it's this constant circular argument, and as a result, training never gets done. I think it's key to have, as Scott mentioned, realistic sales training, training to a standard, and then holding people accountable to that standard after the training is complete. I do agree with Scott completely about having the sales and management participating together, because that's critical. You have to have both parties invested and involved in the training, or it won't stick. And I think some of it's old school, but as far as the more tactical sales training, I think simulation, role play, things like that have value. But a lot of people tend to dismiss that as old school. But I've seen it work, especially for newer salespeople.
How about LinkedIn, networking, other social media? How has that impacted the sales process?
Very much. I get that a lot from teams that I'm working with. When I say let's start with, before we talk about lead gen, before we talk about market outreach, any of that, let's look at LinkedIn. And the number one thing I get from people, especially salespeople who've been doing it for a while, LinkedIn is just for people looking for a job.
Right, exactly.
No, anybody you come in contact with, whether you're looking for a job or looking to sell or whatever, anytime you meet somebody today, the first place they're going to go is looked at LinkedIn. So you better make sure that your profile is up to date. You better make sure that you've really dialed in what your value prop is, who you are. Have a robust LinkedIn profile, and then from there, networking. As I tell people from my corporate days, if I would have known 10, 15 years ago what I know now about networking, being independent, it would have been a game changer. Most people are not effective networkers, and that's the way of the future. When I talked about before about adding value, well, if I'm working with a client and maybe they have a need, for marketing, or maybe they have a need for, some HR help, there's a lot of people in this room that I've networked with that I can bring in and add that value. But I wouldn't be able to do that without networking. And, the old adage, you never know what somebody knows. You might meet somebody and think, well, that just wasn't a fit. And 6 months later, they're introducing you to somebody else that becomes a client. So networking is definitely key.
Networking, and then educating and kind of leveling up on your own game. What books can folks read to help themselves in this whole experience of trying to level up and get better at the sales?
Sure. Well, there's many awesome books out there. There's probably a handful that I would start with, and some of these are old school. I would start with Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's been around for a long time. It's a classic. Another one that's not necessarily 100% sales, but Think and Grow Rich. The Go-Giver. Harvey McKay's got some good. He's got a variety of books out there, but Harvey McKay was really the first one to come up with a CRM. The McKay 66 was really the original CRM.
Exactly.
And then something a little more modern is Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. Read that even if you're not in sales. It will help you just in negotiating a pay raise or buying a car, what have you. Those are probably 3 or 4 of the key ones that I would start with.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing those. Rebecca, talk a little bit about connecting an organization's purpose and the salespeople's purpose. We heard from Scott a little bit of trying to understand motivations and stuff, but tell us a little bit about purpose and how do you get it aligned?
Yeah, I definitely will do that, but I have 2 comments about role playing with showing people how to do it. I've got clients who thought role play were 2 4-letter words. They said, we aren't doing that. What do you want me to do? Who am I being? It was very confusing. But there are a lot of people who learn by, you have to show them, you cannot tell them, and they literally cannot see how it's supposed to be done unless you show them. So that's really good. And then the value add, which is so important now with consultative sales, really, no matter where you are. Sometimes the value you think you're offering is different than what they are perceiving. I've had customers where I'm talking and I don't think it's a big deal what I'm saying, and they stop and then they ask follow-up questions. Like the value I think I'm giving them is actually different than what they are appreciating. So if you ever question, well, what's my value I'm offering? It would be, what are the questions people ask you? If they're asking you very basic questions, you're not offering that much value. If they're asking you in-depth questions about your expertise and they're very deep, you are offering really good value. But those are kind of good litmus tests. Okay, so connecting the purpose of salespeople to the sales goals. I'm always amazed at how few people actually do this, and it really hurts everyone's production. I shared this story in my book, and I don't know which chapter it was, but I had been talking to a sales leader about his goals. The book is about goal setting. And he was super excited about his team's goals. I said, that's great. How are you going to do it? We're just going to work really hard. And I said, okay. But he didn't know the average production of people on his team. He didn't know how many people he had to recruit to get on his team. He didn't even ask the people on his team. And it is very energetically different if you are trying to engage people into buying into your vision. If you say, this is our goal, our investors, we were up 20% last year, our investors want us to be up 20% this year, here's your quota. I'm not against quotas, but instead, or asking, what are you getting out of this? Why do you do this? I have a client right now with all of their leaders are digging into their whys, and it's incredibly powerful because you get aligned. The number one thing people want is to contribute to an organization's vision, doing what they do best. So figuring out what they want, their goals, their purpose, how you can incorporate them into the purpose of your organization, you will find that they do things, they will go the extra mile, they will be much more coachable. If you help them get what they want, you're going to get what you want. And the best sales leaders do that, and it has a huge impact on the sales team.
So how do you communicate that purpose and that why, not only to your team, but also to your customers?
So selling is a transference of feelings, right? And I always say leadership is a transference of hope. It's a transfer of energy and getting people excited. So before you can communicate the why, you have to back up and think through what yours is. It is not a bad goal to be wanting to make money. It's not a bad goal. It's not a bad goal to be the best. There are salespeople who are very driven by status symbols and achievement, and I think you should run with what you're good at. But if you want to communicate the why, that's what people buy. Daniel Pink in his book Drive spoke about this of really, he says you double your sales when you communicate the why. When do you do this? Well, you do this, it's important to do this in discovery when you actually need to say it. So last month, I had closed the biggest sale of my consulting firm, and the reason they went with me was because I had communicated the why. I was not the cheapest option. They probably could have looked elsewhere, but they worked with me like they work with salespeople because I kept communicating the why. So how to communicate that in the process would be to take a step, because buyers are thinking it, what do they want? Why are they doing this? How much commission are they? They're thinking it. So just address it. So, and I sell sales leadership consulting, so it was a variation of, listen, I know the impact sales leaders had on me, and when you trained the sales leaders, that ripple effect is felt beyond, all the way through your organization. Why you want to do this instead of just doing sales training, right? We talked about that. Scott already talked about that, doing sales leadership and sales training, is because it's going to change the people at your org. It's going to make them better people. High performers, Gen Z, millennials, everyone wants to be a better person. They want this from work. They expect you to train them at work. So just give them what they want and do that. So that why came through. And I did provide evidence of results my former clients have had, but that's really important. So if you're not communicating why you do what you do, and sometimes that why is very powerful, but that connects your conviction and that they feel it differently, and you'll close more sales.
That's what we all want.
That's all we all want.
So to get there, we need to create some synergy between the vision, culture, and sales training. How do we do that?
Yeah. So first of all, we connect the dots between the three of those, the vision, strategy, and the sales training. I had a client that just, they were hemming and hawing over sales training, and they finally went with Grant Cardone's sales training. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, Scott.
Sorry, Scott. Yeah, they should have called you. I know.
I'm bleeding.
So that training works well with car sales. Let's say, like there's certain training. Grant has got a swagger about him. But in this type of sales, their strategy is consultative sales and relationship sales. So if you use those tactics that are taught in the sales training with the culture, with the people on your team, and in a different type of sale, it doesn't work. So are they learning something? They are absolutely learning something. And it can be overwhelming. There are, I don't know how many sales trainings there are. I can't even imagine.
Doesn't matter.
Okay. There's a lot. There's a lot. And they probably have all helped someone. But when you're looking at who do I hire, how do I help the people on my team, it's very important to connect all of those things together. And with the development, you look at the talent and then you determine the play. So who is on your team to start with? We waste so much time and money trying to make people something that they're not. No amount of development will help someone develop a talent that they're just never going to have. You can develop skills, but you can't change someone. And I think recognizing the strengths of the people on your team, devising a strategy around that, helping training, it all fits in together, and it's very powerful, and you'll find yourself actually making inroads instead of wondering, oh, that wasn't good. We don't believe in training. I don't know. It didn't work. And it's like, well, that one could have worked for someone else.
We've talked a couple times about getting the sales leaders involved, and maybe their past track record would say they're kind of not involved. But how do we make sure that we get the right sales leaders who can lead the sales teams in the environment that we're in?
So the one constant in sales is it's changing, right? And the amount of changing is very different by industry. If you are in a rapidly changing sales, your sales is changing rapidly in your environment, you need to have sales leaders who can handle that change. The sales leaders are your influence. They are the ones who have all the resources. They are the ones who are giving the bonuses. And if those people are not in the right seats, it's not going to work out. So a way to kind of think about that is you could have, it's like the right person, wrong role. But if you have rapidly changing sales culture and you've got a really great person with a ton of experience, but they do really well by maintaining the status quo, by doing the sales talk word for word. If it's not broke, don't fix it. It's not broke, it's just not keeping up, right? You've got a really good person in the wrong role. So it's to be sure you are recruiting and promoting the right sales leaders into that so that they can help, because they are the ones who are going to impact all of the change.
So there's a lot of layers to this question, but we're getting toward the top of the hour. So a short version on creating a sales strategy based on the talents of the people on your team. What's kind of like a condensed answer on that?
Condensed, ooh. I don't know if I can do condensed.
All right, well, anybody who wants to answer that question, no.
So the first thing is the talents of the people on your team. I think if you can define something, you can duplicate it. And if you are not defining what type of salesperson is successful or the type of salesperson you need to sell your product, no amount of any of this is going to help. So you need to hire for culture. Are they a cultural fit? Do they align with the values? Are their behaviors going to fit in? Like all of that. So you always hire for culture and then role fit. But the role fit is never quite defined. And I'll go into organizations. I do this as a certified Colby consultant. We break down who is most successful here, what are the qualities, the personality types, whatever it is of your best salespeople, define it, duplicate it. It's not complicated, it's just, we're so in the weeds of our stuff, we can't back up and see it. That's why you'd hire someone to help. But the talents are always determined on the hiring. When you are doing development, again, players, then the play, and then promotions. I could talk about hours about this, but we promote the best salespeople into sales leadership, and they have no business being in sales leadership. And it's not that great salespeople make terrible leaders. That is not the case at all. But you need to define what makes a good sales leader, what they need. Can they do it? we set so many people up to fail by promoting them, and they think that's the only path to get there. So really taking time to dig into that. And yeah, I could talk a lot about that. That's like my niche of the leaderboard to leadership, but just make sure you're setting people up to succeed with the talents that they have.
Okay, lightning round, 30 seconds or less. Answer in whatever order you would like. What's the most important piece of advice that you would offer to our audience?
I go first. I think beliefs are so powerful, and I was introduced to that when I was very young, when I started sales back in 1987, and it was kind of, for me, it was one of those things, well, okay, that's cute and sweet, check the box, I know beliefs are important. As I get older and I think about my behavior and what I want to change and how I want to grow, I am limited by my beliefs, and my beliefs hold me back. And when I'm conscious about my beliefs, I have a greater chance of changing them to be able to perform something different to get a better result.
I would say know what you're good at, acknowledge what you're not good at, and stop trying to be someone that you're not. Stop trying to make your salespeople be what they're not. Really align your talents, your loves, your passion, your purpose to doing work that matters so that it's much more meaningful and you're more effective.
To tail on that, I was going to say, make sure you have the right people in the right seats. The analogy is, if you're a donkey, no matter how hard you train, you're never going to win the Kentucky Derby. So make sure you have the right people in the right seats.
Very true, Tom.
Apropos for this weekend.
Yeah.
All right, so 30 seconds or less. Common pitfalls, sales pitfalls that business leaders should look out for.
Tom, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll take this. One that it's very different. Two things. One is watch that you don't have one customer become too big of your business. It's very easy. You have a good customer, they're growing, you're growing, and next thing you know, they make up more than 70% of your revenue. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Key thing, I see that happen a lot. So that's be my number one watch out.
I would say that your success is not based on your bottom line, but the size of your pipeline, like the pipeline to prosperity, and to always be aware of what's coming in the door and how you're managing that.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to look at it from a sales perspective. I'm going to back up something that Tom said earlier about being curious. When you're caught off guard in a situation, are you irritated? Are you defensive? Or do you feel like you are superior over a situation? And if you do not address an uncomfortable situation with curiosity, you're not going to learn, you're not going to change, and you're not going to have a constructive conversation. And it can be very easy for us to become defensive on some situations or feel like we're superior or irritated, and we're never going to learn anything unless we're curious.
Love that.
If I can just add one thing, one of the biggest dilemmas for a business leader is also when you have a rock star salesperson, but they don't share your values. That's so difficult because they're bringing in the revenue, but they're causing all kinds of problems internally. That's really tough one. I mean, think of someone like a Randy Moss. What do? Do you at some point if it gets bad enough, you probably need to move them out of the organization. But that is so difficult when they're bringing in all the revenue.
What's a piece of advice that you wish you would have heard or been told earlier in your career?
Network. When I first started in my career, nobody really networked. And I wish I would have started that earlier and done a better job sooner.
That it doesn't have to be so hard. I was taught that hard work pays off. And so I took that to be, then it must have to be hard for me to deserve any sort of success. So you don't have to pain yourself through the whole process to feel like you deserve it.
I would say practice resilience. I think the greatest contributor to success is commitment. And if you end up caving in under the first sign of adversity and you don't have resilience, you're not going to be stronger. And I learned this the hard way of switching jobs every year. And finally, I wanted a job with this one company, and they said, I'm sorry, you have short-timer syndrome. You can't deal with adversity. You have no resilience, and I don't think that you're going to survive. So you don't get a chance. No go. And I learned that one the hard way. Commitment.
How about summing up today's conversation in a key takeaway?
I think one key takeaway, we talked about books, we talked about training. Be a lifelong learner. Read whether it's in your area of expertise or not. we talked about being curious. That is probably one of the key things. Continue to be well read, be curious, and listen.
I think just slowing down, don't be so busy putting your head down, going to work that you don't look up and see opportunities. So making quarterly meetings with yourself, annual meetings with your team to say defining what's working, defining what's not, and then taking a step back.
Mm-hmm. I think all the content has been very relevant in today's marketplace, and there's a lot of chatter on sales. It's probably the most elusive department in an organization. CEOs have a difficult time understanding sales. It's one that they just don't even want to get near. But I think the information that Tom and Rebecca shared today is very, very relevant in today's marketplace, and I believe it works because I've seen it work. It's great advice.
All right. Remember to seek out Tunisia and Alicia if you'd like to learn more about what they're doing in South Minneapolis. September 14th, we're going to be right back here doing AI topics again. Let's thank our panelists.
Thank you.